Robert, 81, strode into the studio with the air of a man ready for a fight. His gray blazer was impeccable, but his eyes were cold, almost foreign. He tossed a curt, "Hey," to an assistant trying to hand him a water bottle, and headed to the green room. In the hallway, he ran into Martin. "You ready, Marty?" Robert asked, but there was no warmth in his voice. It sounded more like a challenge. "Ready, Bobby," Martin replied, attempting a light-hearted tone. "But what's with you? You look like you swallowed a lemon." Robert snorted and turned away. Martin frowned. He knew that look, the same one Robert used in his roles as gangsters or psychopaths. But this wasn't acting. The audience, mostly older folks, flipped through their programs, whispering about their favorite films by the duo. They'd come for nostalgia, for stories of Hollywood's golden years. None of them suspected the show would veer far off script. The host, Ellen Wright, a 60-year-old journalist with a sharp tongue and a soft smile, stepped onto the stage. Her cream-colored suit gleamed under the lights, and her voice was confident as she introduced the guests. The room erupted in applause as Martin and Robert took their seats on the couches. But a keen observer might have noticed they sat a little farther apart than usual. "Gentlemen, welcome." Ellen began. 50 years of collaboration. From Mean Streets to Killers of the Flower Moon. What keeps you together? Martin smiled, but it was strained. "It's the passion for stories, Ellen. Bobby and I have always found a way to tell the truth through film, even when it's been tough." Robert grimaced, as if Martin's words stung. "Truth," he echoed, a mocking edge in his tone. "You call that truth, Marty? Or just your vision, forced on everyone else?" The room fell silent. Ellen raised an eyebrow, caught off guard, but quickly recovered. "Wow, sounds like we've got a heated discussion," she said, trying to lighten the mood. "Robert, what do you mean?" Robert leaned forward, his gaze locked on Martin. "I'm saying that sometimes Marty's genius is just a way of saying he gets his way. And if you don't agree, you're either a fool or," he paused, "or out of your mind." The audience gasped. Martin froze, his face paling. Ellen opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Martin said quietly but firmly, "Bobby, if you've got a problem, say it straight. No need for a circus." "Circus." Robert laughed, but it was bitter. "You call this a circus when I've been putting up with your visions for half a century? Your lectures on how I should act? You think I don't see how you look at me lately? Like I'm some old idiot who can't keep up." The audience exchanged glances. Some whispered, others pulled out phones to record. Ellen tried to intervene. "Guys, let's take a deep breath. This show is about your friendship, about friendship." Robert cut in. "This isn't friendship, Ellen. It's a partnership where one of us always had to be the great director, and the other just a performer." Martin removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. When he spoke, his voice was calm but steely. "Bobby, I've never thought of you as just a performer. You know that. But if you feel I don't respect you, let's talk. Right now. Off camera if you want." Robert scowled but didn't respond. The room held its breath. Ellen, sensing the situation spiraling, called for a commercial break. Backstage, Martin sat in a chair, clutching a glass of water. His hand shook. Robert stood by a window, staring at Manhattan's lights. A chasm had opened between them, one neither knew how to bridge. "Why'd you say that?" Martin asked softly. "In front of everyone. You know the headlines will eat it up." Robert turned, his face a mix of anger and pain. "Because I'm tired, Marty. Tired of being your shadow. Tired of people thinking I'm nothing without you." Martin stood, his eyes blazing. "You think I want that? You think I don't see how you've changed cinema? Bobby, you're half of what we built. But you can't just throw accusations and expect me to stay quiet." Robert opened his mouth, but stopped. Something flickered in his eyes, doubt, maybe even shame. But he just turned away. "I need to think," he muttered and walked out. Martin was left alone. He could hear the studio buzzing beyond the door, assistants whispering about what had just happened. He knew this moment would change everything, their reputation, their legacy. But what worried him most was losing a friend. When the show resumed, Martin returned to the stage alone. Robert didn't come back. Ellen, trying to salvage the moment, asked, "Marty, what's going on? Are you and Robert okay?" Martin looked at the audience. The crowd, many of whom had grown up on their films, waited for an answer. He could have lied, said everything was fine. But instead, he spoke, his voice raw and honest. "Bobby and I, we're human. We have differences. Sometimes we hurt each other, even when we don't mean to. But I believe we can find common ground. Because what we've built together is worth fighting for." The audience applauded, but Martin felt no relief. He knew this was just the beginning. The conflict that had erupted in front of millions wouldn't vanish overnight. But he was ready to take the first step, not for the cameras, but for the man who'd been part of his life for half a century. New York hummed beyond the studio windows, but the backstage corridor was quiet, broken only by the muffled chatter of technicians and the distant city noise. Martin Scorsese sat on a folding chair, holding a cold coffee that had long lost its flavor. His gaze was fixed on the floor, where the scuffed linoleum hinted at hundreds of shows that had played out here. But none left such a bitter taste. Robert De Niro had vanished after his sharp outburst. Assistants whispered that he'd climbed into a black SUV and driven off without a word. Phones in the studio buzzed with notifications. Social media was ablaze with headlines. De Niro calls Scorsese a tyrant. End of a legendary duo. Martin knew tomorrow's papers and tabloids would tear them apart. But that wasn't what weighed on him. He was thinking about Robert, about what lay behind his anger. Ellen Wright, the host, entered the corridor, clutching a tablet. Her usually polished look was slightly disheveled, a strand of gray hair loose, her eyes betraying fatigue. "Marty, we need to talk," she said, sitting beside him. "We just lost a quarter of the airtime because Robert left. The producers are freaking out. What do I tell the audience?" Martin sighed, his fingers tightening around the plastic cup. "Some show, huh?" he said with a bitter smile. "Tell them the truth, Ellen. That Bobby and I had a fight. That we're people, not untouchable icons." Ellen leaned closer, her voice softening. "I get it, but you know how this works. People want drama, but they also want hope. Give them something to hold on to. Otherwise, tomorrow we'll all be buried in comments." Martin nodded. She was right. But how do you find words when your heart aches? He stood, squared his shoulders, and returned to the stage. The audience, mostly people over 55, greeted him with cautious applause, looking at him with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. They'd grown up on his films, Casino, Goodfellas, Raging Bull. To them, Martin and Robert weren't just a director and actor. They were part of their lives. "Thank you for staying," Martin began, his voice hoarse but sincere. "I don't know what you're thinking right now. Maybe you're disappointed, maybe shocked. But I want to tell you something. Robert De Niro isn't just an actor I work with. He's my friend. And like all friends, we have moments when we don't understand each other. Tonight was one of those moments." He paused, feeling thousands of eyes in the room and beyond the cameras fixed on him. "I don't know what happens next. But I know one thing. I don't want to lose what we've built. And if I have to fight for it, not with shouting or insults, but with talking, I will." The room erupted in applause. Some wiped tears. Ellen, standing to the side, nodded with a faint smile. Martin returned backstage, adrenaline giving way to exhaustion. But deep inside, a spark of hope flickered. The next morning, Martin woke in his Manhattan hotel room. Sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from his daughter, Francesca. "Dad, you okay? Everyone's talking about last night." He smiled, but it faded as he opened the news. The headlines were brutal. De Niro accuses Scorsese of manipulation. Scorsese humiliated before millions. Worst was the viral video. Robert's out-of-your-mind moment looped endlessly. Martin tossed the phone aside and went to the bathroom. Cold water on his face snapped him back. He stared in the mirror, seeing wrinkles etched deeper over the years, the gray that had fully claimed his hair. What went wrong, Bobby? He thought. His thoughts were interrupted by a call. It was his old friend and producer, Irwin Winkler, over 90, but with a voice still brimming with energy. "Marty, you seen what's going on?" Irwin began, without preamble. "Everyone thinks you and Robert are done. But I know you both. This isn't the end." "What happened?" Martin sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I don't know, Irwin." He blew up. Said I don't respect him, that I put myself above him. I tried talking, but he just left. "Listen," Irwin's tone grew serious. "Robert's always been hot-headed. But he's not stupid. Give him time. And don't let the press dictate what's next. You two are bigger than headlines." Martin nodded, though Irwin couldn't see. "I want to talk to him, but I don't know if he'll listen." "Then make him listen," Irwin shot back. "You're Martin Scorsese, for God's sake. You've made people listen your whole career." That afternoon, Martin drove to a restaurant in Little Italy where he and Robert used to lunch in the 70s. The place hadn't changed much: red tablecloths, the smell of garlic bread, old photos on the walls. Martin sat at their favorite table by the window, ordered an espresso, and waited. He'd texted Robert, "I'm at Emilio's. If you want to talk, you know where to find me." Hours passed. Waiters cast curious glances, but didn't approach. Martin was about to leave when the door opened, and Robert walked in. He looked exhausted, his eyes red, as if he hadn't slept. Without a word, he sat across from Martin. Silence settled. Outside, cars honked, and inside, soft Italian music played. Finally, Martin spoke. "Bobby, I don't know what I did to make you feel this way. But if I hurt you, I want to fix it." Robert stared at the table, his fingers gripping the tablecloth. "It's not one thing, Marty," he said at last, his voice low, almost broken. "It's years. I see how you work, how you pour everything into the films. I've always tried to keep up. But lately, I feel like I'm falling behind. Like I'm not who I was. And you see it." Martin leaned forward, his eyes filled with pain. "Bobby, you think I don't feel the same? I'm 82. Every project's a battle. But I've never doubted you. You're the heart of our films. Always have been." Robert looked up, and for the first time in a long while, something like warmth flickered in his eyes. "Then why don't you ever say it?" he asked. "All these interviews, all these awards. Everyone talks about Scorsese's vision. Where am I?" Martin felt a lump in his throat. He realized Robert was right. He'd grown so used to the spotlight that he hadn't noticed how it affected his friend. "I was blind," he said softly. "And I'm sorry, but I want to change that. Not for the press, not for the show. For us." Robert was silent for a long time. Then he picked up the menu, opened it, and muttered, "Let's order something. I'm starving." Martin smiled. It wasn't full reconciliation, but it was a start. They ordered pasta, talked about old times, laughed at silly moments on set. But both knew there was work ahead, not just on their friendship, but on how they'd present themselves to the world. A week later, Martin and Robert appeared together at a press conference. The room was packed with journalists, cameras humming, but the atmosphere was different. They sat close, their shoulders nearly touching. Martin spoke first. "Bobby and I worked some things out. We're not perfect, but we've built something special together. And we're not done." Robert nodded, his voice calm but firm. "We had a fight. It happens. But we respect each other. And we'll keep working together, not because we have to, but because we want to." The audience applauded, but Martin and Robert looked at each other. They knew there'd be more tough conversations, moments of doubt. But they also knew their friendship, like their films, was worth fighting for. Autumn in New York smelled of wet pavement and roasted chestnuts. Martin Scorsese sat in his Upper East Side apartment, holding an old photograph. In it, he and Robert De Niro, young and grinning, stood on the set of Taxi Driver in 1975. Martin in a cap, camera on his shoulder. Robert in a leather jacket, cigarette in hand. They looked invincible, like the world was theirs. Now half a century later, Martin looked at the photo and felt time's marks, not just on their faces, but in their hearts. 2 months had passed since the disastrous talk show that nearly destroyed their friendship. The press conference where they announced their reconciliation had calmed the media somewhat, but headlines persisted. Is Scorsese and De Niro's makeup real? What's behind their smiles? Martin and Robert knew the world was watching, waiting for another scandal. But they decided they'd no longer play by the tabloids' rules. Their conversation at Emilio's had been a turning point. That night, they didn't just eat pasta and reminisce. They made an unspoken pact, to be honest with each other, even when it hurt. Martin promised to listen more, to acknowledge Robert's contributions, not just on set, but in public. Robert admitted his anger wasn't just about Martin, but about his own fears, fear of aging, of becoming irrelevant in a fast-changing world. One chilly November morning, Martin and Robert met in Central Park. Leaves crunched underfoot, the air thick with a scent of damp earth. They walked slowly, holding cardboard coffee cups. Martin, in his usual dark coat, looked pensive. Robert, in a wool jacket and scarf, seemed calmer than usual. "Remember how we tore through these paths, shooting King of Comedy?" Robert said suddenly, nodding at the trees. "I nearly broke my leg chasing those pigeons." Martin laughed, his laugh raspy but genuine. "And I thought you did it on purpose, for the shot. You were always ready to kill yourself for a role." Robert smiled, but his gaze grew serious. "You know, Marty, I've been thinking about what happened. What I said on the show. I was wrong. Not about everything, but I shouldn't have aired it in public." Martin stopped, turning to him. "Bobby, I wasn't a saint either. I got so used to being the great director. I didn't see how it looked from your side. We both messed up." Robert nodded, his fingers tightening around his cup. "But we can still do something, right? I mean, not just save what we had, but make something new." Martin raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at?" "A film," Robert said, a spark in his eyes Martin hadn't seen in years. "Not another gangster epic or historical drama. Something real. About us. About aging. About friendship. About making peace with ourselves and each other." Martin considered it. The idea was risky, too personal, too raw. But it resonated. Their best films were about people wrestling with their demons. Why not tell their own story? "It'll be tough," he said finally. "People will expect us to fail." "Let them," Robert shot back. "We're Scorsese and De Niro, remember?" They laughed, and for the first time in a long while, their laughter was light, like the days when they were young and fearless. The next months were filled with work. Martin and Robert began crafting a script with a young screenwriter who brought a fresh perspective but respected their experience. They spent hours in Martin's office, cluttered with books and old film reels, arguing over dialogue, scenes, characters. But these arguments were different, not about power or ego, but about telling the story right. The film, titled The Last Frame, followed two old friends, a director and an actor, navigating a crisis in their relationship after decades of collaboration. It wasn't an autobiography, but every scene carried their truth. Martin insisted Robert not only star but co-direct. Robert hesitated at first, but agreed, and it became their shared triumph. Filming began in spring 2026. New York, as always, was their canvas: gritty alleys, bustling restaurants, quiet parks. Onlookers who stumbled across the sets whispered, seeing Martin and Robert together. Social media buzzed. They're back. This'll be their best yet. But for Martin and Robert, it wasn't about glory or a comeback. It was about saying what they hadn't said to each other before. Every scene, every frame was their conversation about mistakes, forgiveness, and what it means to be human in a world that forgets so easily. The Last Frame premiered in Los Angeles in fall 2027. The theater was packed, critics, actors, directors, but also everyday people who'd grown up on Scorsese and De Niro's films. As the lights dimmed and the first frames appeared, silence fell. The film wasn't perfect. Some critics called it too sentimental, others too introspective. But for many viewers, especially those over 55, it was a revelation. It was a story about their generation, about grappling with aging, about holding on to those who'd been there all along. When the credits rolled, the room erupted in applause, some wiping tears. Martin and Robert took the stage, holding hands. They looked older, wearier, but their eyes shone. Martin took the mic. "This film isn't about us," he said. "It's about everyone who's ever lost a friend, but found the strength to bring them back. Thank you for letting us tell this story." Robert, usually reserved, added, "And thanks to Marty, for not giving up, for reminding me why we do this." The room stood, cheering. It wasn't a Hollywood triumph, no red carpets or grand speeches. It was a quiet, profound moment when two men who'd nearly lost each other found their way back. The epilogue remained open. Martin and Robert made no promises of new projects, no bold declarations. They kept meeting, sometimes at the restaurant, sometimes in the park, sometimes just on the phone to talk about life. Their friendship wasn't perfect, but it was stronger, because they'd learned how easily it could be lost. To the world, they remained legends. But to themselves, they were just Marty and Bobby, two old friends who'd learned to listen, forgive, and move forward. And that was their greatest victory.